All right, let's dive into a world where, get this, our thoughts might actually shape reality. We're talking Brian Scott's Reality Revolution, and wow, this book review is really something.
Sounds like Scott's onto something with the whole blend of science and spirituality, huh? Seems to be resonating with people.
Yeah, big time. He kind of makes you rethink things,
Yeah.
like those what-if questions about the power of our minds. Maybe they aren't so crazy after all, especially when you bring in like quantum mechanics and stuff.
And that's what I find so interesting about Scott's whole approach. He uses quantum mechanics, but not like, here's the answer. More like, hey, what if, Like, if the universe can do crazy things at the subatomic level, who's to say our thoughts don't have some kind of power too?
So we're not going to get all, lost in quantum physics equations and whatnot. It's more about, like, what does this mean for us?
Exactly. It's all about how we can, use these ideas, maybe even influence reality. Scott calls this whole thing reality transurfing. Like,
Yeah.
we can shift between different realities. It's almost like surfing, riding the waves of possibility.
And then there's quantum jumping, which seems to be more about making those shifts happen on purpose with intention.
Right, exactly. It's saying we're not just along for the ride, we're actually shaping reality.
All this might sound a bit, out there. But the review talks about how Scott uses these analogies that make it all make more sense, like the one about planting trees. He says you need space for them to grow.
And what's really neat about that analogy is it connects directly to this idea of getting rid of beliefs that hold you back. Like, if your mind's all cluttered with negativity, it's like trying to plant a tree where the soil's already packed with roots.
So you're saying we got to, like, clear out the old stuff, make space for the new, like decluttering our mental garden or something.
You got it. It's about creating space for new possibilities, letting them take root. And this is where Scott's whole emphasis on breaking free from the past comes in.
There's this quote from him that really got to me. As long as you carry with you everything that you are, defined by your past, you'll be limited to what you can have in the future.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. It's saying, you're not stuck with your past. You can choose to let go of the stories that don't serve you anymore and embrace a new story.
This is already making me see the link to quantum jumping. Like if we shed those old limiting beliefs, maybe we open ourselves up to different realities where those limits just don't exist.
Exactly. It's all about shifting your perception, your internal state, to line up with the reality you want.
Okay, so we're starting to see how these concepts all connect. But how does quantum mechanics actually fit into all of this?
Well, Scott uses it as a kind of like a framework to suggest that reality might be way more fluid, way more interconnected than we usually think. He talks about how at the quantum level, particles can exist in multiple states at once. It's called superposition.
So he's saying maybe we also exist in multiple states.
Right. And maybe our thoughts, our beliefs, even our intentions play a role in which state we experience.
Whoa! This is blowing my mind a little. But if we can shift our beliefs, open up to new possibilities, what could that mean? Like, practically speaking.
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The reviewer mentions another quote from Scott that really hit me. He says, "We are never more than a belief away from our greatest love, deepest healing, and most profound miracles."
That's a huge statement.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder, like, how do we actually shift those deep down beliefs? It can't be as easy as just, deciding to believe something different, right?
Right. It's not always easy. And this is where Scott introduces this whole concept of, get this, pendulums.
Pendulums, like the things that swing back and forth.
Exactly. But Scott's using the term metaphorically, He's talking about forces or maybe ways of thinking that can actually work against us, against our intentions.
Okay, so how does a pendulum work against us? Like, what's an example of that?
Sure. Let's say you're really anxious about giving a presentation, right? You're totally focused on how much you want it to go well, maybe even obsessing over all the things that could go wrong.
Oh, yeah, I think we've all been there.
So Scott would say that intense focus, that importance you're giving it, that's actually creating a pendulum effect. The more you worry, the more you feed that pendulum. And it can actually attract, like, balancing forces, things that create obstacles or throw you off track.
So the more we cling to a specific outcome, the more likely it is to, like, slip away.
That's the idea. It's almost like the universe is trying to keep things balanced, If we get too high, too attached, too invested, the pendulum swings back the other way to bring us down.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see how this all connects. But if being too attached to outcomes is a bad thing, what's the alternative? Like, how do we break free from these pendulums?
Stott says the key is to cultivate detachment. Not like not caring, but not being so fixated on a specific outcome. It's more about trusting the process, letting things unfold naturally without forcing them.
It sounds like a tough balance, setting intentions, but then letting go, surrendering to the flow.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot
Yeah.
where you're clear about what you want, but not so rigidly attached to how it happens.
This reminds me of something the review mentioned called Indra's net. It's this image of like an infinite net, and at each intersection there's a jewel, and each jewel reflects all the other jewels.
Ah, yeah. That's a beautiful way to picture how everything is interconnected. And Scott uses it to challenge how we think about time. He's saying maybe time isn't just a straight line. Maybe it's more like a multifaceted jewel with different aspects we can access if we know how.
So instead of being stuck on a rigid timeline, maybe we need to be open to things happening in unexpected ways, at unexpected times.
That's a powerful way to look at it. It's about surrendering to the universe's wisdom, trusting that everything's happening in perfect timing, even if it doesn't seem like it at the moment.
This is really making me rethink my whole approach to life. But if it's not just about willpower, forcing ourselves to believe something, how do we tap into this deeper level of understanding? How do we actually influence reality?
Well, this is where Scott throws out a really interesting idea. He says the heart, not the mind, is our true connection to this infinite field of information.
Wait, the heart. Like our actual physical heart. I always thought the brain was the control center.
That's what we're usually taught, right? But Scott suggests the heart plays a much bigger role than we realize. He sees it as the bridge between our individual consciousness and this vast interconnected reality.
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around my heart being the key, not my mind. Have you had any experiences that make you think this might be true?
Well, I think we've all had those moments where you just know something, a gut feeling that leads you in the right direction, even if your logical mind doesn't get it.
So you're saying those gut instincts, the ones we often ignore? Maybe those are actually more important than logic when it comes to navigating reality.
That's a really big question, and one that Scott seems to be encouraging us to really explore. He's not saying logic and reason are useless, but maybe there's this deeper level of understanding, a wisdom that comes through our hearts that we're missing out on.
This is making me really question, everything I thought I knew about how reality works. If our hearts are the key, how do we even, tap into that wisdom?
Well, that's where things like, meditation and mindfulness come in. They help quiet down all that mental chatter, and then, that deeper knowing can start to come through.
So it's about learning to listen to those little whispers, those intuitive nudges that we usually just ignore.
Exactly. It's about trusting that inner compass, even when it doesn't make sense to our logical minds.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the theory behind all this reality transurfing and quantum jumping stuff. But what about real life? Are there, examples of people actually using these techniques?
Well, the review doesn't give any specific examples, but it does mention something about Scott's own journey. Apparently, he first got into this whole reality transurfing thing after, get this, his house was broken into.
Oh, hold on. An invasion. That's pretty intense.
Right. It makes you wonder if maybe going through tough times can sometimes, open us up to new ways of seeing things.
Yeah, when your familiar reality gets shaken up, maybe that's when you're most ready to consider other possibilities.
That's an interesting thought. When we're pushed outside our comfort zone, our minds get more flexible, more willing to entertain ideas we might have dismissed before.
And speaking of possibilities, the review mentioned something called the URA technique for activating and actually making them happen. But it didn't really give any details.
Yeah, too bad. Sounds pretty cool. But even without all the specifics, I think we can still connect it back to the whole intention thing. If you can really clearly define what you want and, put your energy behind it, maybe you can actually attract those realities.
So it's like sending out a signal, right? Attracting the experiences that match your vibe.
Exactly. And it goes back to the whole pendulum thing, too. If you're always focused on what you don't want, you're accidentally feeding those negative pendulums, just bringing more of that stuff into your life. But if you can switch your focus to what you do want, that's when you start activating those positive pendulums and drawing those experiences to you.
And the review also mentioned something about energy rituals and movements, things like the Tibetan Five, the Door of Life, and the Zen swing. It sounds like Scott brings in some physical stuff, too, not just mental exercises.
Right. That's really interesting. It's like saying there's a connection between our physical body and the energy that shapes our reality. It's not just about thinking the right thoughts. It's about getting your whole being involved in the transformation.
I love that. It's like a holistic approach to creating your reality. But let's go back to those pendulums for a sec. Can you explain a little more about how giving something too much importance can actually work against you?
Of course. So Scott's saying that the universe works on this principle of balance. When we get super attached to a specific outcome, when it becomes too important to us, it throws things out of whack, And the universe, because it always wants balance, it'll often bring in these counter forces to even things out.
So it's like a cosmic game of tug of war. The harder you pull on one end, the harder the universe pulls back.
That's a great analogy. And those counter forces, they usually show up in ways you don't expect, right? Like obstacles or challenges that seem to be blocking you from what you want.
So what do you do? How do you not get caught in that pendulum swing?
Scott says the answer is detachment. Not caring, but not being so focused on a specific outcome. More like trusting the process, letting things happen naturally.
But don't you need some level of caring to stay motivated? How do you balance that desire with detachment?
That's a great question. It's a balancing act for sure. You got to find that sweet spot,
Yeah.
Being passionate about your goals, but not so attached that you create resistance.
So it's about surrendering to the flow, but still having a clear vision of what you're aiming for.
Exactly. And it comes back to trusting your heart. When you're in tune with your heart's desires, things just flow more naturally. You're not forcing, you're allowing.
This is making me think about the power of belief. It sounds like Scott's saying that if you can really believe something, even if it seems impossible, it can actually become real.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway from this whole deep dive. Scott keeps coming back to the power of belief. He even says we're never more than a belief away from our greatest love, deepest healing, and most profound miracles.
That's a pretty amazing thought. But how do you actually cultivate that kind of belief, especially when your mind is full of doubts and fears?
Well, Scott thinks humor can be a powerful antidote to fear. He even says that lucky people are really just relaxed people.
I love that. So instead of getting all stressed out, maybe the answer is just to chill out, take things a little lighter.
Yeah, exactly. When you're relaxed, you're not feeding those pendulums with all your worries and anxieties. You're more open to possibilities, more adaptable to change.
Kind of reminds me of that saying, let go and let God. Maybe there's wisdom in surrendering to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, that's a common thread in a lot of spiritual traditions. And Scott seems to be saying that this surrender, this trust in the universe, is a big part of tapping into the power of reality, transurfing, and quantum jumping.
So it all circles back to the idea that our thoughts and beliefs actually shape our reality. And if we can let go of our fears, anxieties, expectations, maybe we can create space for something really amazing to happen.
It's a beautiful idea, for sure. And Scott's book seems to give us a way to actually do that. He says to use humor to deal with fear, to relax and embrace the unknown, and to trust our hearts to guide us.
That thing about the heart being our guide, it keeps coming up. It's like Scott's saying that intuition and feeling are just as important, maybe even more important, than logic and reason when it comes to navigating reality.
It's like he's saying our hearts are the key to this deeper level of knowing, a wisdom that goes beyond the limitations of our minds.
Wow, this deep dive has been incredible. We've covered some pretty mind-blowing stuff. But before we wrap things up, I want to dig a little deeper into some of the practical things Scott talks about. The review mentioned a few, but it didn't really go into detail. I'm especially curious about those reality hacks we mentioned before. The review talked about things like visualization and energy work, but it didn't really explain them.
Yeah, those are definitely areas where some more explanation would be helpful. But from what we've talked about so far, I'm guessing those techniques are about, intentionally focusing your energy and attention on the reality you want to create.
So with visualization, you're basically making a mental picture of what you want to experience, almost like watching a movie in your head.
Right. And the key is to really use all your senses. Don't just see the outcome you want. Try to feel the emotions, hear the sounds, maybe even smell the smells that go with that reality.
So it's like you're actually living the experience, even though it's just in your imagination.
Exactly. The more real you can make it, the more you align your energy with that reality. And that might be what draws it into your physical experience.
That makes me think of that Scott quote about being never more than a belief away from our greatest love, deepest healing, and most profound miracles. If you can really believe in what you're visualizing, maybe that belief is what makes it happen.
It's a pretty powerful idea, isn't it? That our beliefs, along with our intention and energy, can actually shape our lives.
And the review also talked about energy work. Do you think Scott means things like energy healing, or maybe practices like Qigong or Reiki?
It's definitely possible. Those practices are all about working with the energy fields around and within our bodies, right? And if our hearts are our connection to that infinite field of information, like Scott says, then maybe those energy practices help us strengthen that connection and, boost our ability to influence reality.
So it's not just our thoughts and beliefs, but also the energy we're putting out into the world.
Exactly. It's about aligning your mind, your emotions, and your energy with the reality you want to create. It's that whole holistic thing we were talking about earlier.
This whole deep dive has been really mind-blowing. It makes you wonder, if we really do have this power to shape our reality, what does that mean for like our collective reality? Could we as society actually shift our beliefs and create a better world?
That's a big question, and I think it's something we're all trying to figure out. Scott's work definitely suggests it might be possible. I mean, if our individual beliefs can affect our personal realities, it makes sense that our collective beliefs could shape the reality we all share.
It's like we're all weaving this giant tapestry, and each thread is a thought, a belief, an action. And the more we weave in threads of love and compassion and understanding, the more beautiful the tapestry becomes.
I love that analogy, and it shows how important personal responsibility is. If you want to see the world change, you got to start with yourself, with your own thoughts, beliefs, and actions.
Well, this has been a truly inspiring deep dive. We've explored some pretty mind-bending ideas, but I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of what Brian Scott's reality revolution is all about.
I totally agree. This deep dive has definitely given us all a lot to think about. If our beliefs really do shape our reality, what beliefs do you need to re-examine or maybe even let go of to create the life you truly want?
That's a great question to leave our listeners with. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I definitely recommend checking out Brian Scott's work. Who knows what amazing things are possible when we embrace the power of our own reality revolution. Thanks for joining us.